What's up, everybody? Brian Elwood here. Welcome back to the Virtual Real Estate Investing Podcast. Today, I've got a special guest on, a guy who's been on before, a guy who I've worked with for close to 5 years now, Mr. Danny Coleman. What's up, Danny?
What's going on?
Not much, man. So I just got back from actually visiting Danny in Columbia, Tennessee, where he lives. Last week, I went to Nashville, saw my folks, saw Danny and Ashley. We had a good time up at Asgard Brewery.
Oh, I got a shout out.
Yeah. Hopefully they are okay with me shouting them out. That's another story for another time. Anyways, while I was in Columbia, I went to a project that we had going on there that Danny was managing. And I watched him interact with the contractors at the house. And I've always known that Danny's been a great communicator. But seeing it in person, Danny, was something that just really clicked it, home for me. I was like, he actually asks questions and listens to their answers, and he pays attention to the details and all this stuff. And it kind of clicked on me like, man, I kind of see why he's a better manager than me, and he's better at dealing with the details that have to be dealt with in small businesses. And I sent you the Voxer, just kind of, giving you props for that. And so I wanted to have you on today just to speak more about that, about like, what does it take to have good relationships with the people in your company or with your contracted type partnerships, like a contractor or whoever. So why don't you speak a little bit about that today?
Sure. Yeah. So thank you, by the way. Lots of times when you're good at something, it's hard to give yourself any kind of credit for it or even to acknowledge it. And apologies to anyone listening, by the way. I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat. Sorry about that. And I'm working through it, but we had this scheduled to do today, so I wanted to do it. Communication for me is something I did kind of realize that I was better than the average bear at it. I'll never forget my dad, who's military, would talk to me growing up, and he would be like, Danny, like, employers want people who can communicate. Employers want people who can communicate. And I just did not understand what he was talking about. And I was just like, can't everyone talk? Like, can communicate? He didn't really ever go into any levels to it. And it wasn't until I had my first management job, working for a painting contractor in California, that I realized what he meant. And it was just, it's just people have a natural tendency to not really say what they think. Or if they don't say what they think, they just don't say anything at all. So they either say something that they're not actually thinking, right? They kind of say what you want to hear. Or they just don't say anything at all. They just say, yep, okay, and acknowledge it. So communication is so important just because, this is how you get your ideas out of your head and into somebody else's. Written word obviously is the best way to have good communication. But as far as, that's not always, possible. So specifically, you were talking about contractors. So I've learned just like throughout my life, I guess, just how to talk to different people. Everyone wants to be talked to differently. So for instance, like when I'm talking to you, there's certain words I know I can and can't use. Actually, I don't think there's any words I can't use. You're a pretty smart guy. And you've done a lot, in your life. You've been to college. And so your vernacular, your vocabulary, I may be able to use the full range with you, but somebody else may not have had as much of, an educational background, or they may have had some learning disabilities or something like that. And when that doesn't make them an incapable person, it just means that as a communicator, you may need to have to facilitate things a little bit more than, a normal, or than maybe just you and I, because you and I have rapport and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm kind of all over the place. There's a couple different examples I'll give. So I'll start with communication and why it's important and how you can be good at it within your own team. So the first thing about, and a lot of these are going to be common denominators stuff. So I'll say this several times, but I'll use these examples to try to make it pertinent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, listening, right? So you mentioned that listening really is a conscious thing. It's not something that does come like naturally to me per se, although I think I'm more naturally inclined to it. But I do have to consciously like stop my brain when I'm looking at somebody and like listen to everything that they're saying and not think about what I'm going to say next. It really just has to do with being present. And you and I have had a lot of personal conversations about being present. Communication, same thing. If you want to have good communication, you need to be present and be listening to the person, whatever it is they're saying, really hearing them out, not thinking about, like I said, what you're going to say next, or maybe, anything else for that matter. Just really just listen to the words they're saying and what they're trying to communicate to you. And then ask clarifying questions. So when you're listening, you can ask clarifying questions. And that helps too. So a specific example, like within your own team, would be to understand the position of the person that you're speaking to and respect that. So this goes across the board. Same thing with contractors. If you're speaking with a contractor, what is it that they're good at? And so ask clarifying questions to get them to explain themselves, because they're speaking from a place of authority, right? And you want to make sure that you're giving due respect to that authority, what they know more than you about. So like, your teammates, let's just say Ashley, for instance, our administrative assistant, who's awesome at what she does. When I'm talking to her, I need to make sure that I respect the fact that whatever she tells me about, whatever it is I've asked her to do, that it's legitimate, right? Never to write off, anything that she's maybe having difficulty with or whatever, to write it off and be like, well, as a manager, I see it this way. I need to listen to the fact that she's the person executing that and really give her about 90% of the control over that. And when you do that, it creates a better relationship, and that better relationship kind of just has like compound interest, if that makes sense. I might be sprawling a little bit here. So if you have any kind of specific questions, just like jump out and stop me.
Yeah, I do. I want to go back to something you said kind of towards the beginning. Lots of good stuff right there to unpack, obviously. You said something that along the lines of people don't normally say what they really mean. Why do you think that is?
Everyone's afraid of confrontation, or most people are afraid of confrontation. And then the people who like confrontation are typically, they're argumentative. They're looking to fight. They're looking to argue with you. So it's like you have most people who do not like confrontation, and then you have a few people who like confrontation. And they're definitely two different bags. And I probably wouldn't work with anyone who I felt liked confrontation. I would not want to work with that person. I wouldn't hire them, and I wouldn't hire them as a client. There's no need for that. That usually, there's a deeper issue there that's a psychological thing. If you like confrontation, then, whatever, I'm not going to be a therapist right now. So I deal with, but in my world, I deal with, because of the people who I choose to be around and work with and stuff, I deal with people who don't like confrontation. And if you don't like confrontation, then you don't say what you really think oftentimes, because someone might not say to me what I don't want to hear. So for instance, like say a contractor, for instance, I'm like, hey, are you going to be there on Monday? They want to say yes, right? They may feel in their minds that they're like 49% sure they'll be there on Monday, or maybe even 50% sure. Maybe they're like, I'm pretty sure I'll be there on Monday. Almost never is the first thing that they say, especially if this relationship's somewhat new, it's not going to be genuine. You have to ask them, okay, so excuse me, do you feel like you can commit to me that you will have this done on Monday? Because I don't want you to commit to something that you're not able to do. When you ask that question, you give them an opportunity to be like, well, you know what, if I'm being honest with you, and that's what a lot of people say that, right? And you know what, if I'm being honest with you, and the reason that's such a cliche thing to say is because so often people aren't honest with you, and it's not something maniacal. They're not being like, I'm going to lie to them. It's not like that. They just simply are afraid to say something that you don't want to hear, because they know that it's going to become uncomfortable for everybody. So you have to, as a good communicator, you need to be the person who's willing to break that ice and to kind of breach that, cover that gap, so that you can actually give them the space and the opportunity to tell you something that you don't want to hear, by letting them know, I'm ready to hear what you have to say, even if it's not what I want to hear. Does that make sense? And I think that's why.
Okay, it does. And I think you may have answered the question I was about to ask next. If not, you can add on to it, which was, so a lot of the listeners of this show are business owners seeking to be real estate investors. Even if you're just looking to buy rentals, You're going to need like contracted type relationships, or just you're going to need a title company, an inspector, a contractor, a property manager, et cetera, and maybe some in-house employees too. So as a business owner who's seeking to do these things, how do you create an environment where these people are comfortable enough to be honest with you?
So yeah, that's really good. So I mean, as far as your internal team, which is what you have the most control over, it's culture. And we may have talked about this a little bit before, but one of the really great things that we had before and we have now with our team. I first experienced it with you and Frank's business before when I was an employee, and then you and I are working to create that here now. But it's great culture, and that culture means that that positive culture, it gives people it lets people know that their workplace is a place that you're allowed to disagree with authority
Mm-hmm.
in. It's not traditional. It's still typical in most businesses right now to respect authority and the hierarchy almost blindly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unfortunate. And so what you can do as a business owner is to let people know, excuse me. So let people know that it's okay to disagree with you. And this, you can foster this type of, I don't know what the word is, I guess culture. You can foster this by having regular meetings. So that's a big part of it, because when you have a regular meeting, in those meetings, you kind of open up the floor for them to be honest with you. And then this is probably where it's going to take a while in your business. If you've not been doing this already, you're going to have to do what I mentioned earlier, which is go that extra step to let all of your team know that I'm ready to hear what you have to say, even if you think I don't want to hear it. And that's the role that you have as a leader, or as I call it the aggressor in the communication kind of cycle, if you will, is that you have to be the one who goes out on a limb first and says, here's a space to speak, or here's what we're thinking about doing. Give us your feedback. Tell us what you hate about this. And you and Frank did a great job with that, because you kind of helped me break through that wall by asking me almost continually when we would have our one-on-one meetings, what do you hate about your job? What do you not like? What do you, what are you bored by? And in my head, as a hard worker, that's the way I was raised to be, I would just think to myself, like, I like this job. I'm fine. I can do this. That's not all that fun, but I can get it done. It's all good.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until that you kind of broke through there, at least with me. I don't know how it was with the other guys and their one-on-ones, but once you broke through that, then you started getting like the most genuine feedback that I could ever provide to you. And when you can break through on that with people, you can get that genuine feedback. It's the best your business can ever be, because you have people who are being honest, and you guys are getting to decisions so much faster because there's no malarkey. People aren't being like, oh, well, I like this, and then secretly they're like, I hate this.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know.
That's really, really good stuff. I love that. So ask your employees questions like that. Eventually, if you ask it enough, they're going to have to either get real with you or go find another job. Right.
Exactly. It got to the point where I felt like pressure to give you guys something. And so then of course my brain naturally went to the thing that I felt like I could say, I don't like doing these spreadsheets or whatever, And you guys are like, all right, let's find a way to get that off your plate, or have somebody else do that, or maybe we don't need it or whatever. And then, you eliminate the things that kind of are keeping people from being 100%, both productivity wise and honesty wise.
So. That's awesome. I want to ask you another question about listening, because you talked about how when you go listen to somebody, you have to intentionally shut your brain off and listen to everything they have to say without thinking about what you're going to say next. Now, I honestly have trouble with that. And I'm guessing some other people that are listening to the show do as well. When I'm talking to somebody, like if I don't think about what to say next, I feel like I'm going to look stupid and have that moment of, or that moment of awkward silence at the end. If I'm not prepared with a reply or a rebuttal or whatever it is. So how can I overcome that?
Well, one thing that I would say is think about how much more awkward it would be if you responded to something that they didn't really say. You know, if you weren't listening to where their question or whatever their comment was, or they ended their sentence, you were like, and your reaction was wrong. Like they just got finished saying something about how, you know, their dog died or whatever. And then you were like, not really listening, you know, because maybe they slipped in the dog died thing in a long sentence or a long couple sentences. And so you were just like, man, that's crazy. And you're like, what? Like, think about how much worse that would be than it would for you to be like, wait, say what you said again. And I say that a lot. So if I don't feel, because it does take effort. So oftentimes I do find myself saying, wait, say that one more time. Or like, I don't know if I'm sure a lot of people have seen The Office by now, where like Michael Scott says something to the, you know, gosh, what's the actor's name? I forgot his name, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. The main guy. Yeah.
He's like, okay, explain that to me as like I was 5. Lots of times I do ask people to either repeat themselves or I'll say, can you say that like, but in a different way? And I'll probably try to word it rather than sounding like that. Can you say that in a different way? But sometimes that's what you need. You know, they're just like, wait, let's kind of simplify this for me or whatever. So if you feel like your brain's going because you want to have a response, think instead about how you can give a better response, or you can always just ask them to repeat themselves. If you've not, you know, be okay with asking someone to repeat themselves. So that's what I would do as far as like to start. But something just to always kind of keep in mind is that like, you're not an expert on everything. So don't expect that you have to give people a good answer on everything, you know? So also just be willing to admit that like, yeah, man, I don't know what I'd do in that situation either. You know, and everyone wants to give answers, you know, just like our healthcare system, you know, it's just like everyone was like, the doctors are like, oh gosh, I got to just give them something, you know, I got to give them something because they want pain, you know, pain relief now, you know, or people want solutions from you now. But you have to also just kind of get used to the fact that like, you don't have a solution and tell them that, you know, or maybe tell them what you do and leave it at that. I had a talk with a friend one time as well, and he was another visionary. And he had talked to me about just how he kind of struggled, you know, having like deep relationships or whatever. And I told him, I was like, man, you know, honestly, lots of times you do know a lot of stuff. You're an expert on a lot of things. And lots of times people don't want to hear what you're an expert on. You need to be willing to be the person who's not the expert in the room. And you need to be figuring out what it is that they're good at or what do they know about and ask them to talk about themselves a little bit.
Interesting.
So
it reminds me of that quote, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds cliche and it's probably been shared a million times on Facebook, you know, but like, it's true.
Yeah.
It's like, if you come in and we're sitting here having a beer and while we're there, it's just you talking about how great you are at something or how much experience you've had with this or that or the other thing. And then when I say, oh yeah, well, here's what I like to do. And you're like, oh, cool. So yeah. So anyways, you know,
back to me. Yeah.
What you need to do is you need to be pushing them, ask them questions, and basically just have a learning mind in your brain. Just want to learn. So like they're good at like making custom knives. Like I have no interest in actually making knives, but hey, like what goes into making a custom knife?
Yeah.
I'll tell you about that. And then now you got a friend. Now you got somebody who you're going to see again, and they're going to be like, hey, you know what? This guy was interested in what I do. I'm going to ask him what he does, you know?
You're right. And even when it comes to a relationship like with a contractor, which you might think that it's strictly business and, you know, just asking somebody like that. So you got any kids? You know, you always done this for a living, or, you know, and digging in is you're going to end up getting better work out of that person, as crazy as that sounds, because they know all of a sudden you become significant in your mind because they can see that you care about them on some level.
Yeah. You know, it's like, I'm an extrovert by nature. And for a long time in my life, I always had problems with awkward silences. Extroverts hate awkward silence. And so they immediately will just start yammering to fill it. And I would do that too. And then I married an introvert. And it kind of helped me to realize that like, and now I have a daughter who's definitely an introvert too. She's 7, but it's very clear she is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll ask both of them questions and they'll kind of give me a I don't know, answer. But as long as I kind of just wait and I leave that space open, they'll kind of come back with like round two. And I think a lot of people are like that too. I don't know if there's any type of statistics about who's introverted people versus extroverted people percentage wise in the world or whatever. But as an extrovert, I feel like I found that there's more introverts that exist out there than extroverts. That's just my subjective opinion. And as such, if you're able to kind of wait for that space, like you were saying something just a second ago, and like you paused for just a second, and my natural inclination was to go ahead and jump back in with something, to say or to answer your question.
Yeah.
But then because I gave you a second, you actually kind of clarified the question for me. And then I actually gave you a better answer. So it's little things like that. And I honestly didn't observe a lot about that until I just started realizing like how important communication was and how much I didn't know about the world, and that you get so much further when you leverage other people's experience. I think you've talked about this quote before, of the story before about Henry Ford.
Yeah.
How like when he was taken before the court and they were like, hey, you're ignorant. And he tried to sue the newspaper for libel. And they're like, no, they asked him all these random questions. And he's like, he didn't know answer to a lot of them. And he's like, I can push a button at any time on my little push button console here and ask any one of these questions that and some man who works for me will come and answer it for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like in a not manipulative way. That's what you should do with your network or with any group of people that you work with, is know what they're good at and allow them to be good at that and encourage them to be good at that by asking them questions and promoting what it is they're an expert at, telling them to do that more, encourage them in that regards, and stay in your zone and don't feel like you got to know everything. And so to bring it back to the most practical application, which started all this conversation, which was contractors. Working with contractors, it's very different. A lot of these contractors are technicians, and they are very, very good at electrical or HVAC or something like that, but they're not necessarily great businessmen or women. And that's something that we, it's like there's this undue pressure on them to be all things. And we all have that. We all have this undue pressure on us to be good at everything. But once you learn about what you're good at, then you can retreat from those spaces. And that allows you to put other people in your life who know these things, and you let them be an expert in that space, and you let them be your go-to expert. And, like I got a buddy who does waste management stuff, who does like porta potties and disposals and stuff like that. The big, I'm losing the word, what I'm talking about. The big things you put trash in at construction sites. It sounds terrible. I've lost dumpsters, man. See, I'm not an expert.
We flip houses, guys. Trust us.
Yeah. But that's, and so instead of me going out and looking for a local person here to do that, I asked him some questions about dumpsters, something that I maybe could have Googled or whatever, but doing that kind of helped foster our relationship a little more.
Yeah.
And what I did is I acknowledged what it is he was good at. And you did that too with me. And that's a good thing. Like you bolstered me by acknowledging something that like I started this all out with. Yeah, I didn't know particularly that I was good at it until people started telling me that. And once people start telling you that, you're like, great, I'll be good at this and you be good at that. And let's work together and do a lot of awesome stuff. So
yeah, that's awesome, man. That Henry Ford example you brought up kind of brings this whole thing to a head. It's like, why should people care about having good relationships? Well, there's many reasons. One, like being happier and getting close to people and more job satisfaction, but also if you have great relationships with a bunch of different experts, you can go a lot faster as a business person. Mm-hmm. If you imagine how long it would take you to become an expert, or all the years that all of your team that have put into learning their expertise. If you had to learn how to become an electrical expert and then a plumbing expert and then an HVAC expert and then a marketing or Facebook ads expert or whatever else we outsource, that's years and years and years. Or you can just get good at working with them and you instantly tap into their expertise and you're like benefiting from the years of their experience instantaneously.
Yeah. Instantly.
And that's essentially what we're going after. Well, Danny, this has been awesome, man. I got to cut you off because we're trying to keep these, a certain length. We could go all day on this, so we'll do another one soon. Where can people go to find out more from you or learn
So
more?
my website is www.dannycoleman.me, M-E. And you can also, on there, I've got my own podcast where I talk about small business fundamentals, organizing chaos, small practical strategies for small teams and small businesses. So yeah, you can find me there. You can listen to my content there. And I'm not really selling anything right now, but I would love to hear what you have to think about when it comes to small business. If you have any input, hit me up there.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot, Danny. And thank you guys for listening. We will see you on the next episode. Peace.
Thanks, Brad.